It is 5 o'clock. We're waiting with bated breath. All right. We'd like to welcome everybody here today. It is Tuesday, February 7th, 2023. We will start by indicating who is here. Clark
Nelson.
Karen Winder. Chris Wynn.
Connie Burgess.
Kim Chandler. Julie Jackson.
Todd Hauber.
Rich Nye.
Nicole McDermott. All right. We are going to jump right into our 5 o'clock administration reports, and we have a final report of our land trust expenditures. Who's on for that? Ben, are you up?
Ben, who's doing land trust?
It's just a report. It's on the, I'm not sure why that's on the agenda the way it is. It is that spreadsheet. I can throw it up for you.
Okay.
But really it was just, I guess if there's any questions with relation to those plans, then we can assist with that.
Okay. So questions, anybody questions on that? All right.
So correct me if I'm wrong, Rick, did those show up on a consent agenda in a future meeting? Or this is it?
This is it. This is just providing information.
Very good.
Okay. I was going to say they're on the consent agenda, so just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing anything. All right. So we have our capital and construction update with Don Adams and Justin Nagley. I'll turn the time over to you, gentlemen.
Good evening.
Doesn't feel disjointed at all tonight, does it? Everything is smooth and running well. Justin, let's start. You're up first.
Okay. On security upgrades, there's not much to report from last month. We have finished up all that's under construction, including our most recent one at why am I mind gone blank? Yep, thank you, William Penn, thank you. And the other two are Oakwood and Woodstock. They are ready to begin April. We have a contractor that you all approved last month, and anxious to get started there, and that will go through the end of July and be ready to start the new school year with the new security project in place.
Can I just ask a follow-up question on that one? Those are such new schools, relatively speaking. Can you just give me a minimal amount of color on what upgrades are needed, given how recently they were constructed in the first place?
Yeah.
Sure. Even though they're recent construction, roughly a decade old, schools about a decade ago really weren't getting security installed. And so this is, if you were to walk in those schools, you could walk right into the remainder of the building and not have to enter an office, not have to go past an adult, right? And so the concept now in all of our security is you have to encounter an adult in the main office before gaining access with their permission to the remainder of the school. So in this case, there's, you basically divert them very quickly at the front passageway, you're familiar with them, so a hard right-hand turn into the office. And then they would go along the office into the building and then be buzzed out into the school.
These two plans will be exact replica of Diamond Ridge. We did that a couple years ago, but because it's the same floor plan, what we did at Diamond Ridge is exactly what these two will look like when it's all said and done. And then with Fremont, this is where we were working underneath if you will, the basement area underneath the school to upgrade the piers that had some damage. Their last pour was, I believe, today is what I heard, and so they're just buttoning things up. We should be done here in the next week or two. It really, as far as I've been told, hasn't impacted the school at all. They're down below and working away and not making too big of a fuss, so hasn't affected the school at all.
Magna Elementary is getting a bunch of control work as part of ESSER upgrades. Magna, again, was a couple of schools put together. One built early, the next one built about 2.5 decades later. And so they're slightly different types of systems, and the system has never really been up to comfort level or up to energy efficiency. And so the contractor has been doing a lot of controls work, going to modern electronics, new valves, things of that nature. We have had less complaints coming from the school, so we think we're doing well, keeping things under control with them. We should be finishing this up shortly, but we're we're 90+% of the way through that project, and it's looking like it was designed to do. Again, existing school at Hunter Elementary with a boiler replacement. We pretty much finished up 2 high efficiency boilers now in place controlling the rest of the school, and that system went down just a few weeks before the start of school. So the team's been working this well, and we've been keeping the building at temperature through winter. Hunter High School, again, HVAC controls. This is more ESSER work. We're probably 95% of the way through this building. Again, controls upgrades to modern electronics. So we'll start to be more energy efficient, and we'll start to have greater comfort in the building as we finish implementing these through.
Okay, jumping in to our new construction with Skyline. The softball, you'll see some photographs here in a moment, but the softball building is being buttoned up and finished with painting and all kinds of finishing lights and tile and things like that. The kitchen and the testing center in the new academic portion of the building, we'll show you some pictures in a minute where they're standing in the concrete panels and the structural steel is up, and they're actually putting some roof joists on and some decking. And then we had a little issue with an exterior, well, which is now an exterior wall. It was an interior wall, and I'll show you a picture of that in just a minute as we jump to the next slide. So here we are talking about that wall. The slide on the right is a wall that goes all the way up from what was the gym. You'd be standing in the gym looking this way towards the auditorium, looking east. That wall in the original drawings was double layer, two courses of block all the way up, and it was grouted and had rebar in it. Does not have grout or rebar in it, and so we're having to scramble and figure out a secure way of holding that wall in place. That wall becomes our exterior wall for the next 3.5 years while we build around it and keep the auditorium in place. The new building is not far from where this photograph was taken, and so it's a tight 20 to 25 foot space in between the two buildings. So anyway, we're working on this wall to get that up and secure it for the duration of the auditorium, which is 3.5 years. This is the building for the softball, the press box, and the score building. The first photo is on the left is the exterior, and they're painting. They've got a tent to the right. That's why that's showing that plastic material there. It's tenting that, keeping it warm so they can paint it. And then the other photo to the right is interior photo being painted. Getting that all. There's some tile work going in. And then the photo on the left is the testing center that I mentioned. That's looking north and a little bit west. The new athletic building is just beyond. You can barely see there in the top of the photo or towards the right of the photo. And then the photo to the right, you're looking west. That's through structural steel that will be multi-levels and have all kinds of cladding around it, but just seeing some of the red iron going up. Again, looking for the slide to the left is looking to the north. That's more of that graphics and sewing area that will be eventually there when it's all fit and finished. And then their photo to the right is showing some tilt wall construction happening and getting those poured so they can stand those when they're ready. You see the cranes in the background there. And as far as the change orders for this month, there wasn't anything that needed to come to the board on board level approval for change orders at Skyline. So we're trying as hard as we can, keep pushing forward on that project.
Cypress coming together in again a non-phased manner to Skyline, so you'll start to see a little more activity on the photos, but again really working to get the structure up, get steel in place, and we are starting to see some of the interior finish work, which is important here. So snow-covered site, we've been seeing maybe an inch or two out there. It's still staying frozen, so we're getting some good progress. But as temperatures warm up, we get a little bit muddy, things get a little bit harder to maneuver. But in this imagery, towards the lower left, you're seeing the auditorium building. That tall part is the fly loft for the auditorium. And then in the distance, you have the pool and gym structure. And then in between, we're going to meet in the middle with academics. A lot of site work is going on, retaining walls, believe it or not, running storm drains in preparation for hopefully paving the planned north parking lot this summer. So we might actually start to see less mud being tracked in our neighborhoods. A lot of growth out there with that residential development when you get a chance to go up. So this image shows the gymnasium floor being prepped. That floor has been poured, so the slab is down, concrete in place of the yellow vapor barrier when you get out there now. This is where some of our framing is starting to take place, the mechanical and plumbing starting to arrive on site. These are mechanical rooms, bathrooms, and kind of everything on the lower level of the athletic building right now. A lot of roof steel decking is starting to occur, even some roofing itself that we'll show you as we get into the gymnasium. The fancy auditorium cloud steel, so all of the elegant shapes that are part of an auditorium are starting to show up. Again, more framing, HVAC, amazing plumbing work in your restroom that's guaranteed to last for 40 or 50 years, fingers crossed. And again, proceeding well, no substantial change orders right now, getting some small pluses and minuses, 5,000 deductions to 8,000 additions, and balancing out well as we go through construction. Westlake Junior is proceeding well. We're starting to see, again, more vertical construction. Some of the exterior skin, not the final, but trying to weatherproof those in so we get past some rough plumbing and mechanical. You're starting to see a lot more steel come in. So typically we've been showing pictures of the southern wings of those buildings. Now we're starting to move into the middle of the building and building towards the block structures to the north, which are the gym and the auditorium. Again, more of that academic, getting some sheathing on it. The gymnasium roof steel structure is up. Most of the block is completed in that general area, and concrete will arrive in the not too distant future. Again, so now you're starting to see us expand that steel more into the center of the building as we're getting closer to where the offices would be. And no change orders coming from Westlake. Okay, that's the end of our deck. Any questions? All right, appreciate it. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. All right, we are going to move on to the next item, which is capital project management. We're going to invite BDK, our representatives from BDK, to come on up, and they're going to share with us. Go ahead, Rich.
Yeah, while they're coming up, thank you, Board President. We've invited BDK here to share what it is that they do and how they do it when it comes to project management. As you recall, we had a project manager up until last March, almost a year ago, and staff has been going through the complexities of our capital projects while we were looking to save some funds by going down just internally these services. It became apparent for us to reevaluate what a project management and owner's manager's rep would do in this type of space. So BDK is here with us, and we'll be able to offer a little bit more insight as to what it is they do with these construction management services. And we have questions of them. There is later in the agenda an opportunity for us to also go into some deeper questions about the capital project services generally and how these services might complement or serve those needs. So with that, turn the time over to, who am I turning, Chris or? Okay.
Yeah, I'll go ahead, Dr. Knight.
Thanks.
Can everyone still hear me if I stand up? Is the microphone sensitive enough? Or
We have people listening online, so that might be helpful to speak into your microphone.
You can pick it up.
Would you like to stand there? We have a podium.
I'll just pick it up for a second, so you're not like looking at me out of the corner of my eye. It's easier for me if I'm standing. I can gesture better. This way I can run the slideshow, so I might sit down in a second. Anyway, thank you. My name is Chris Karcher. I'm Program Director with BDK, and this is...
John Kemp, also with BDK, the manager of BDK.
Yeah, so John is our principal for our group. So who we are is we're a joint venture between two companies. We're Big D and Kitchell. So we formed a joint ventureship a number of years ago here in the state of Utah to provide project management professional services for public agencies. And I've been doing this a little over 20 years. And John has been our strong partner here in the state of Utah. We manage the...
Yeah, I'll
Go ahead.
We're telling you now that we're with Big D and Kitchell, but we'll never say that again because we're a joint venture, right? So one of the things that we do is we come together and we work seamlessly as partners. We manage the Utah State Correctional Facility. I was over that project from beginning to end for 5 years. And then right now, we are also working with the Ogden School District to manage all their bonds currently.
And that's what I've been doing for the last several years as well. So what we're proposing to do for the Granite School District is to provide specifically project management services, and you will decide the scope of how much we will be doing, but we have been asked to propose to provide additional staff project management services for the Skyline and Cypress High School projects, which are both currently under construction, as you just heard. So just a quick introduction about who we are and why we do what we do. So essentially what we provide is a third-party bolt-on project management service. So essentially we are hired for a duration or a specific scope of work to help public agencies manage their very large capital projects. In this case, you have a very good team of internal project management who manage a little over 10 million square feet of operational buildings in terms of the work, plus other buildings that you have currently. Plus you've added the two largest public K-12 projects in the state of Utah currently. Very large scope of work, very complex projects that are going on. One's on an occupied site, but they are very large and very complex. So basically, we provide a third-party oversight of that process. We help manage the contractor. We work with the design teams in order to manage those processes. We manage the costs. We manage the quality control on site. What we're proposing to do is provide full-time staff on site to work with the contractor to ensure that the needs of the district are being met from a schedule standpoint, a cost standpoint, and a quality control standpoint. And then in addition to that, we'll provide additional community relations interfaces where requested, communication, and then reporting to Justin and his team and to you as the board on what the progress is, what the issues are, and what's being done to resolve that. Specifically, part of our services that we ask to do, in addition to just our on-site staff and the oversight that we'll be providing, is that we have internal resources. So we have professional schedulers, we have professional cost estimators whose sole function is to support us in our efforts for you to make sure that things are being analyzed from the highest level of a professional standpoint and making sure that you, the district, get what you pay for. I think our track record for if you were to contact any of our existing clients here, they would indicate that we've been extremely successful in both saving time and money and finishing things in a quality standpoint.
Yeah, I think I know there's a lot of things that were said about the Utah State Correctional Facility, whether it was on or off budget, but if you look back at what we were able to do for the state, during the process, we were able to save them around $64 million on that particular project with ideas and things that we were able to do through the process. And then also with the Ogden School District, it's about 16 million
on $100 million worth of work that we were able to identify. The scope here is a little differently. You're already under construction. Much of our effort where we're able to identify those savings is managing through the design process. But the scope here obviously would be to assist Justin and his team with making sure that the projects stay on budget for what you are currently, that they complete on the schedules, and they meet your commitments that you've made to the communities for making sure that it's going to be a quality completion and installation.
I think what Chris mentioned, one of the greatest things is having project representatives on site during projects like this. If you don't have someone on site, they don't see everything that's going on every day. They're not in touch with what's going on with the project because they're just there. And that's one of the things that we're able to provide is really high qualified staff on site on the projects, just to be in touch with the flow and everything that's happening on the project.
Can I ask a quick question? When you say on site, I just want to make sure I'm understanding. So our big projects right now are Cypress, Skyline, and Westlake, obviously. So when you say on site, are you saying on site at all 3 sites? Or on site meaning somebody's traveling those 3 sites?
Yeah, so right now what we're talking about specifically is Skyline and Cypress.
Okay.
And then we would have a full-time person on each of those sites.
Okay.
So two separate individuals.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Plus a supportive person, but yeah, specifically, they would be, their job every day would be to their full-time for the duration of the construction.
Yeah, and then supported by all the services we just talked about, estimating, scheduling, and so they also have those resources behind them to help in the process.
Can you elaborate just a little bit more on that? So there's a first full-time person on site.
Mm-hmm.
They might need some help with scheduling. What does that look like when you say they have access to help?
So in our corporate resources, we have schedulers that can really, so say there's a change event, okay? Say something happens and we need to look at to make sure that what is being proposed from the contractor is fair. We can have, we'll ask them to perform a fragment schedule that really, and a fragment really is just the detailed of what changed. And so our on-site, including our project manager, our corporate staff can help review that and make sure that what's being claimed is valid or not. And if it is, then we can advise you, and if it's not, we can advise you also. One of the other things is quality control. You know, as you're building these buildings, it's really important that they're delivered with the quality that you would expect. And so we have a person that's separate, and a separate individual who's our quality control manager, who will come out and provide reports on what's going on with the quality on the project. If there's challenges, if they're not meeting the quality that's expected, you'll see a report that comes out and it goes to the contractor, and it'll say way before a punch list at the end of the job, hey, you didn't complete these things. Through the process, we'll identify issues or things they're doing right. Because I think that's something that's really important to watch through the process. You don't get to the end of the job and say, oh, here's your huge punch list. But the process is collaborative. It's not like, well, we have someone comes on and is just, you know, working against the contractor. The right way to do this is to work with the contractor and us to make sure the project comes along together as a group and as a collaborative team. And so that's really what we try to do, is work with the district, the contractor, the designers, in a collaborative manner so that everybody is working to the same goal.
A lot of it requires a lot of proactive pre-planning, and John mentioned particular, you know, a claim situation with the schedule. The best thing to do at this point is to, you know, we've already done quite a bit over the last couple months of analyzing the schedules for these existing projects, and, you know, proactively identify some areas that, you know, that we think probably could improve, or certainly at very least, especially in the case of Skyline, that's an occupied site, need to be coordinated closely as you're phasing, moving. You know, I'm sure all of you have seen the dance that's been going around where we're moving from this building to this building to this building, and all those things need to be coordinated closely with the on-site staff, as well as making sure that the contractor's going to meet their commitments, and that those issues are addressed now, not in August of 24 when you're turning over the classroom buildings.
Yeah.
So it really is the proactive effort, like John mentioned, with the quality control. Okay, we've got the HVAC that Justin mentioned. All of those things, here's the quality they were expecting before they ever start on site, so they understand, and so those things are corrected as you go along. So that's where that full-time person on site plus the corporate resources comes into making sure that everything's done, and then less rework is less time is less money.
One more question. And this may be more difficult to quantify, but I feel a need to ask. So a savings of 16 million on a $100 million bond. At what point were those savings most realized in, on the one hand, and what additional savings, understanding where we are in our process, could still be had? And there's that monetary piece, and again, it might be a little bit more difficult to quantify. If the savings aren't as significant as it were at design and architect, what other value add propositions are there? I mean, we heard change orders, quality control, scheduling, coordination. Anyway, curious.
Yeah, so during construction, most of the savings are.
Will you grab that microphone?
Oh, sorry. So during construction, most of the savings that are quantifiable and realized are typically in change order negotiations. Like, okay, the contractors have identified a change event, and you negotiate, yes, that is a change event, no, it's not a change event, or maybe it's not as big as they think it is, or they certainly need to give the value for what they've already proposed to the client as a credit savings. So there's all those different ways that and as an overall, as a part of that 16 million, it was probably, I would venture to say it was probably $1 million, $1.5 million that was realized there. Most of the savings during constructions are not quantifiable because they typically are quality related. So, you know, the contractor had to replace a defective thing that was caught. That's not necessarily something you can quantify what the dollar value is of that, but where you won't see it is in the next 5 years when you're operating the facility as much. But certainly from an identifiable standpoint, most of it is making sure that the architect hit his design scope, that he didn't exceed your budget during the design, or that even in some of the negotiation of the fees, which we are long past on both of these buildings at this point. Once again, the vast majority of the scope is, we would love to say would be from a cost standpoint. The biggest thing at this point is, as I'm sure most of you are aware, is we've been facing tremendous cost escalation in the construction industry over the last several years, and these projects are both caught right in the middle of that time period where I believe the construction year over year was in excess of 22%.
How about that?
So projects that we're looking at now that over the last couple of years we were bidding for $250 a square foot, we're planning on 400, and that has nothing to do with anything other than everything just costs more than it used to. So when someone says it's 8% at the grocery store, don't believe them. In construction, it's 25% per year right now. And so the sooner, if I were to say where I would be hopeful, is that it would be in the schedule management and any time frame that they can either stay within for what they've already promised or reduce, is where the vast majority of those kinds of savings are going to be identified. It's just, it really is an unbelievable period of time that we're living in right now.
I would assume that a major priority of this board is to deliver the schools on time so that they can be occupied and used. So I think that would be a huge focus of ours, and where we could provide value is helping shepherd that process, and so that we can deliver the schools so that they can be used when they're intended to be.
I think that doing the prison is such a huge project, and so that's really exciting to me that you've had that experience, and I wonder if you've done any other schools.
Oh, other schools? Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Now, as far as in the K-12, we've done many of them. Personally, most of my schools have been in higher education, and I've done many for Weber. We're just finishing the BYU music building, just getting ready to start other buildings. So we've done a lot of different schools, but myself, I've done not a lot of K-12, but Chris is extremely experienced.
Yeah, so over the course of my 27 years in working on the owner's side of it, I've done probably 18 different schools ranging from high schools on down. Now, I came to Utah 4 years ago to help manage some of these projects here. So the vast majority of my projects are in Arizona, New Mexico, California, one in Nevada. But as far as the K-12 within the state of Utah, I've been managing the Ogden program
So
for the
you've
last 4
done,
years.
you've done 4 in,
I've done 4 elementary schools in the last 4 years.
yeah, with Ogden, and then just starting a new one.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but overall, I've done probably 4 high schools, and most of them have been elementary and middle schools. Just as you well are all aware, as a tier, you build a lot more of the other 2 than you do of the elementary schools. And you do have 2 very large projects that you're doing here. They're very complex. I would say they're very much more similar to when you're doing a complete campus replacement like this. They're much more similar to a higher education
Oh, absolutely.
facility than they are an elementary or a middle school. They're K-12 by program, but by function, they function much more
More like a campus.
like a small college campus.
It's like a campus, and so.
It's a small college campus.
Yep, and communicate, when you're on a campus, communication is key, right? So understanding flow of work, where people can be, where they can't be. And so that's, I think that's a big focus for also, and something that we mentioned here we can help with is the communications. So it's really, we've taken on a lot of additional work with these 2 schools. I think in our assessment that Justin and his team have done a great job managing what has been given them, but moving forward, we feel like we can help by providing resources to help the projects move forward from this point on.
And really a professional evaluation of some of these changes. You know, like John mentioned, Justin and his team, Ashton, you know, your site inspector, he needs to look at very specific things because you, as an authority having jurisdiction, have very specific legal responsibilities to the state of Utah. And that's where their focuses need to be in terms of the day-to-day management. We're that bolt-on resource to give them professional advice and direction.
And I think bolt-on, maybe we could define that just a little bit. We say bolt-on, and I get used to that term, but really what that means is we come on when you need us, and when you don't need us, we leave. And so it's a way for you to get the resources that you need for the time that you need it to get these projects through. And of course, we'd love to continue to work with you on future projects, but for these particular projects, you bring us in when you need us. And then when you're done, then you go back to resuming your normal business.
Thanks for clarifying that. I used a slang term.
It's okay, we do it all the time in education.
Yeah.
Being around in education, you have your own language anyway, right? So you can understand that.
Were there any other questions or anything that we can?
I was just going to ask the question. So I think, oh, go ahead, Clark. I'll save my comment after your question. Go ahead.
I'm honored. I wasn't trying to sneak in ahead of you, I promise. I have a couple questions. One is, can you elaborate just a little bit further in terms of your resources and how your team expands and contracts throughout the scope of the engagement? And I'm a little curious about the nature of your proposed contract as well, if it's based on time and materials, or if it's based on a fixed fee, and based on which of the 2 it is, how that expansion and contraction of your team flows in the nature of your proposed contract.
I can.
You want to tackle that, and then I'll
talk
clarify?
about it, you fill in.
Yes,
Okay.
sounds good.
Okay, great. So there are parts and pieces that you're going to need to be there always, right? The managers on site, they will always be there. And so you're going to have one on each campus. But when they need resources from, say, estimating, for example, to look at a change order, then they have the resources of Big D and Kitchell to do that. And so you have the resources of Big D, which is over a $2 billion company, and Kitchell, I don't know where you're at right now, but
Not that big.
not that big.
But we
big.
have specific people that I have a strong relationship with, so.
Yeah, and so we've been working together in this arrangement for years now. We call on those resources when needed. Usually we try to assign people that understand that particular project, and then we call on them when we need them for scheduling, for estimating, The cost control piece is a little different though, because that would be an individual that would be the same individual that would go out on a regular basis and look at the quality, provide a report, and then follow up on that. So that individual would be more consistent. So does that answer your question about the resources?
Yeah, so some of them are periodic, some of them are full-time, and some of them are on demand. So scheduling quality control would be periodic.
So that all makes sense to me. What I want to understand better now is how that impacts your fee based on how your proposed contract is structured.
So we are structured as a lump sum per the state contract. We're being procured under the state contract, which we have an on-call that we competed for with the state of Utah, by which you, as a participating body, have the right to procure under. We are negotiating a lump sum for the duration and for this anticipated manpower loading that we're talking about, so that full-time through the completion of the project, and also warranty to ensure that the warranty services are completed properly in that first year. The first year of the life of the building is the most important. It's when you're operating it, it's when things break the most, it's when things need to make sure that everything is operating properly, and we would oversight that. And then all the rest of the services are as demanded. If we need them more, then we spend the money more, but we have that fixed fee.
Okay. My last question is, what is your past experience working with Hughes?
So I just completed 2 projects with Hughes, the last 2 elementary schools for Ogden. We had them as the general contractor on. That was Polk Elementary and Liberty Elementary. So I have actually been talking to Hughes for well over a year about these particular projects. I have a very strong relationship with some of their upper management, and we've kicked around the can more than a few times, I would say.
Go ahead, Karen.
Okay. I was just gonna say, I'm actually kind of excited. It's really hard as board members when questions come to us that have a dollar amount, because it's this Skyline rebuild has been going on, and it's been frankly full of problems from the get-go. And we did have a project manager, then we went without one, and now we're back bidding for one again. And so you can understand as board members we oversee those precious taxpayer dollars. So what we've got to decide, obviously, and you know this very well, is, is there potential to actually save money on this project and hold those taxpayer dollars even closer and protect them better to get more bang for our buck out of our Skyline and Cypress rebuilds, and obviously Westlake falls in there too. But anyway, so I'm excited at this proposal. I do sense that you can bring a lot of good things to the team. I kind of echo some concerns. I just hope that we can work well with Hughes and give our internal guys the support and help that they need. We tried for about a year to go without a project manager, and it just overwhelmed our team. And while it saved us money, it put a lot of pressure on those internal employees, and I'm excited to see where this goes.
Assuming action is taken, right, to go down this road by the board, how quickly would you be able to stand up those operations and support on those 2 sites?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So I think the first thing that has to happen is we need to probably come together with our team in the district to understand exactly how we're going to work together. So there's a process of engagement there, and we could do that very quickly. Once we understand what exactly how we're going to work together, we could really start engaging more. The one thing we do need, and we know, is we've got to have project managers on each of the projects. I will tell you right now, that's going to take a minute. We don't have people sitting on the bench all the time, and so we have to make sure we have the right people. But we do have folks in our organizations that can do it, and they can be very successful in doing so. But we haven't charged them with that because we don't know at this point whether we're going to engage in this. So getting the people on site may take a minute, but engaging with you and kind of figuring out how we're going to work together could happen right away.
Can you place an order of magnitude on a minute? Kind of frame that for us a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. I would say it's going to take at least 30 to 60 days to get someone on site.
And I think that's a very accurate, just because we've talked about this at some length for several months, and people's assignments come and go, but we've been very sensitive to the fact that this is not, I don't want to put down any particular person. This is going to take two very special individuals within our organization, and some of our, I wouldn't hesitate to say it's going to take some of our top talent, especially on one of these projects, in order to be successful with what we're being charged for.
The person that comes on to do this work not only has to be really good at construction, but also great with people.
People. And those two don't always go together.
Yeah.
And sometimes people are better at things, and sometimes people are better at people. So the other part that I've already talked with Justin at length is we need to make sure that the contractual relationships between all the parties are correct, and some of those things probably will need to be modified. Like you mentioned before, there were some project managers before, and we just need to make sure that all of those, so that
the contracts are amended.
The contracts are amended properly to make sure that as we give direction under the direction of Justin, that's enforceable, and that they take it seriously, and that we're not just here giving good ideas, that they are feel free to take or not take, that we can enforce is the wrong word, that we can strongly encourage the direction of the project in the right direction.
Julie, Kim, Connie, Chris? All right, anything else? All right, gentlemen, thank you for being here. We appreciate the information that you presented. Do you have anything else that you'd like to cap it off with, or?
Do you need us to remain or in the meeting, or or is this the Q&A that was?
I think this is the Q&A.
Okay, all right, great.
We saw the slides and appreciate the depth that you went into there.
Okay.
I hope we asked the right questions, and yeah, we appreciate you being here.
Okay, thank you.
Good information.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have some discussion coming up, right, that's going to further address, so I will save my questions for that particular
Yes,
discussion.
any questions for them?
Right.
Now's the time.
Yes,
Before they
precisely. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for the opportunity. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. And our final item is the student assessment update, and we're going to turn the time over to Rick Anthony and Joan Bramble for this.
Joan heard about how I substituted for her at District Community Council going over data, so she just asked me to sit here quietly, and she will present.
And sorry, I don't have any scatter plots in this one, so.
I have to say, though, those scatter plots from last meeting were pretty cool. I went home and just looked at them further, and I was like, oh, okay. And I love that we're actually crunching the data, because I think it's good data, which drives good decisions. So there you go.
Well, welcome. Thank you for the opportunity, Board and Superintendency, to present. This is our annual assessment report. So we're reporting on last year's assessment results. And so it always takes a while for everything to come together. So this is sort of old data, but it's good data to look at as we reflect back. So the student accountability indicators that we're going to look at tonight are graduation, ACT performance, advanced coursework, English learner progress, proficiency, and growth, which are all under that state accountability piece. And then we'll also look at early literacy measures. Now, those aren't a part of the accountability system, but they are good measures to look at because they do influence future academic success. This is a just quick look at the state accountability system and the different component parts that we've looked at before. They differ a little bit between elementary and high schools, and we're going to start with the high schools and looking at the purple areas on our high school indicators that are different. So here we've got graduation, ACT, and advanced coursework that comprise a good chunk of our high school accountability. So our graduation rates, this is a look all the way back to 2008, and you can see that the light blue on the top is the state's graduation rate, and then the darker blue underneath is Granite District's. We've always fallen below the state a bit. I think good news here is that our percentage is up from last year, so it was 76.6. We went up to 78.7. I think that's a nice celebration given that the state stayed pretty stagnant in those last 2 years. This is a look at your graduation rates by school, and here we're also looking at the last 4 years of graduation rates. So as we look across at different schools, you can see how their graduation rates have fluctuated during the past 4 years. Of note here, we've got Granite Connection that went up from 15.6 to 28.7. When I asked some specifics about why this may have gone up, the principal said that they have made some changes, and they've gone to mini terms. So they've got 8 terms, so there's a restart at a more frequent pace, which I think may help some of the students that are in that environment. So that is possibly of interest as we look at how we're improving our graduation rates.
Dr. Bramble, what is the Youth Educational Support School?
So that is our students who come to us through the state, because we house the students that are coming from youth in custody. And so because we're the last school to touch them, their graduation rates become accountable to our district.
And is there a geographic location for this?
It's throughout the district. So Granite's probably the largest school district that houses students who are youth in custody. For example, Decker
so it's
Lakes.
all youth in custody?
In our school district's boundaries, yeah. So for example, Decker Lake is located in Granite.
So if you hear people talk about the YES program, that's this.
Yeah.
Correct. People will call it YES or youth in custody often.
Oh, yes, yeah, so it might be referred to in different.
Yeah, I was thinking of youth in custody. I didn't realize, yes, now that makes sense.
Yeah. This slide is showing you the graduation rates by group. We can see the black bar on the top is all of our students at that 78.7%. And then we have different colors for different subgroups that we also want to track in terms of how they're doing with graduation rates. The only group here that looks like they dropped would be our students with disabilities. Otherwise, we look like everybody increased, our economically disadvantaged groups and our English language learners. This slide is showing us by race, and again, that black is representing all students, and then we can look across at each of our different populations. I think of note here is that in this 2022 school year, it's the closest that all of those have been across all of the years that are displayed here. So I think that's a good celebration in terms of the gap that we want to narrow between groups. This is that next part with ACT spring administration. So the ACT is administered to all 11th graders across the state, and so this is representing that. Some of our students take the ACT multiple times. That is not reflected in these scores. These scores just are that state administration, so it's all 11th graders. And what we look at is the percent of those students who score at 18 or higher. So when we look at this, I think we can see 2020 is not here because we did not have very many students who tested that year. If you remember, we dismissed. So that year is not here. And this shows just across each of the high schools. And you see on the very far side, the state and the district and how they compared. So we were at 50% overall for our district as compared to 61% for our state. We can break that apart and look at individual areas of that ACT. So this is giving you a look at the average composite score of those 11th graders. So you have 4 areas that are tested. You have English, reading, math, and science. I think notable here is that our average math score has been dropping over the years. This is our advanced coursework indicator. So this is where we look at the percentage of students who are getting a C or better in advanced courses that include AP, IB, continuing education, or they've completed a CTE pathway. So here we're showing across the years from 19 through 22. The blue bar is our district percent, and then the black dot is the state. So we're falling under the state, but we were up to 75.7% in 2022 with this particular indicator. So the next set of slides, we're going to look at the other indicators in state accountability, which include our English learner progress, that's measured by the WIDA Access. And then we have proficiency growth and growth of our lowest 25%. So in elementary, that's measured by the RISE test. In high schools, that's measured with our 9th and 10th graders with the Utah Aspire Plus. So this one is going to look at our EL progress. And again, that's based on the WIDA Access. So each student has a target that they are needing to meet in order to make their progress towards proficiency, or they make proficiency in getting the English language acquisition of the English language. So this is broken apart by K through 8 and high school. And so if you look at 2022, you can see our K through 8, we had 39.4% of our students who met their target or made proficiency, and our high schoolers were at 34%. It is more difficult as students get older to make that target. So typically, we usually see a lower percent. You notice that 2021 looks like an anomaly. And while we dipped quite a bit, and there has been some speculation that this definitely was impacted by our pandemic year, we rebounded quite well too when you look at K through 8 in 2022. This slide shows our ELA, and this is across all grade levels. Remembering again that our 3rd through 8th grade are taking the RISE test, and our 9th and 10th graders are taking a Utah Aspire Plus. What I'm trying to show here is a trend across 3 years. So you've got, if you look all the way over on your 3rd grade, you've got 19, 21, and 22. And your darkest bar is the most recent year for that grade level. Once again, you're looking at a state average, that is the black dot. So we fall below that state average across each of these. And we are rebounding in our lower grades, but there is concern as we look towards some of these upper grades that we're not rebounding back up to our 2019 levels of performance.
Quick question for you.
Yep.
With ELA, as we're switching over to letters training, how does that translate with the RISE test? Is it, I know they said that with DIBELS it doesn't translate very well. Is it similar with the RISE test? Are we seeing, or is this better preparing them for the RISE test?
It should be better preparing them. What Letters is doing is giving our teachers a better understanding of the science of reading and teaching reading better. So what we should be seeing is that those students are coming out being able to read on grade level, which is going to give them that advantage of being able to perform well across all of these tested areas. There's not necessarily a direct correlation, but definitely we're looking at doing a better job of teaching reading comprehension. Any other questions right now? I know I'm kind of going fast because I know
I'm saving
short on
mine for the
time.
end.
Okay, so I'm going to keep rushing through these then, and if you've got questions, we'll handle them at the end. This is math, and in math, again, we're noting more difficulty in math. And when I talk about rebound, I'm looking at, are we coming back up to levels that were that 2019 level? And we're definitely seeing some issues with math. If you remember the scatter plots, we also saw this in the scatter plots, right? Where we lost ground and kids didn't get some of those foundational skills is what we're assuming happened, and then they're not able to really master those standards that are being assessed. Science starts in 4th grade in terms of that assessment in RISE, and then we go through 10th grade on this as well, because that again is measured with Utah Aspire Plus. Once again, we're seeing state and district comparisons. And then we've got growth measures. There are a couple of different ways that growth is looked at. One way is we look at growth in ELA, math, and science. And that's calculated using those student growth percentiles. So students are compared to other students who scored just like them in a previous year. And then a student growth percentile is generated. We took those the state takes those student growth percentiles and weights them based on that percentile. So it's a different weighting. If there's a SGP of 40, for example, they get a 0.25 as a weighted value. If they're higher and they're performing better in terms of growth, I think it's an 80 or above, they're getting a full point for that. And so that accounts for this percentage. So they take those weighted scores and divide it by the total number of scores. So if you look in K through 8, our ELA growth was 59.2%, and in high school that was 57%. Math, again, I think is probably the most concerning data point that I see on this graph, where we're far below when it looks at the comparison to the state. We fall a lot further below in our high school growth. The other way that we look at growth is looking at our lowest 25%. And so for this, that lowest 25% is calculated using the previous year's score. So we have the lowest 25%, and any of those kids who get a 40 or above is put over top of all of the students in that group to arrive at that calculation. So 53.8% of our lowest quartile in K-8 had a 40 SGP or above. Lastly, we have early literacy measures. Here we're looking at the percent of first through third graders that are reading on grade level. Now this is a different metric than when we look at the students with Acadience reading who are at benchmark. At benchmark is a low indicator of having the skills that they need to be successful. This is actually pushing that up a bit and saying these kids are actually reading at grade level. This is a very low percentage, right? To say we have 37.7% of our students who are reading at grade level in first through third grade. The state comparison is there too, and this is why we went to our letters training, right? Because there's an issue statewide with our students, and so we're trying to get better at teaching students how to read. On the other graph, you're seeing our students that are making typical or above progress, and here we had 63% in 2021, and looking at this now, please note that the scale makes it look like that's a bigger difference probably than it really is. And 2022 is 69.8% of our students were making typical or above. It's sort of a similar measure as when we look at a student growth percentile. We're comparing the growth that should be made in for a typical student. And this is letting us know how many of them are at typical or above. And lastly, on the slides, I included a resource with some links out to some good resources if you're looking for other places to see school comparisons or proficiency and growth reports. Data Gateway is a great resource. And then USBE also has a public Tableau site that looks at comparisons. So if you want to look at comparing across other districts and things, these are good resources. So are there questions?
Go for it, Julie.
Okay. So can you go back one slide? Would you say that percent of third graders that has increased, that are at typical or above progress, can we attribute that to letters? Or what else would you attribute that to?
I think we would probably need to see more years of data to be able to really, there are so many factors when you look at
So right now, maybe
research.
it's an anomaly?
I think as we track it, hopefully we will see that's making some difference.
Board President, may I would say anecdotally, but still, yes, letters plays a big part of that, but also in the continual improvement plan of each school, this has been a focus across elementaries, is to identify that metric based on the table on the left or the graph on the left that says we need more students that are reading at grade level in that early literacy space. And so they've put in some very specific action steps. One, have a goal around it, and two, very specific action steps of progress monitoring, interventions, small group, and being very intentional as to how they address that data. So I would say, while there's work that could be done to identify what the correlates are of that, I do know that is a specific target for nearly all of our elementary schools as a goal, and action steps aligned to that effort.
And could you go back to the one that talked about demographics? Thank you for going back for me. One more back. I'm, maybe actually my questions should be saved for another time. I mean, what I want to know is, well, what are we doing for our students with disabilities here? And I mean, so maybe what really, now that I'm thinking about it, maybe what I really need to know is now have a presentation that says what we're doing about this data. Because I think those are really my questions is, okay, so what are our interventions here? And if you go to the next slide, this randomness for our Black kids and our Native kids in the purple and blue, and how they're kind of all over the board every year, and they looked really good last year, but what causes that kind of a schism? Is that a word, schism? I don't know if I made it up.
We'll run with it.
It's a good one. I think sometimes you have small group sizes too that can influence how some of this fluctuates. And I think that might be part of what we're looking at too. I love the idea that you're asking now what, right? Because that's should be the question that we're asking. And as I present to different groups and we look at data, if we're not asking so what and what are our next steps, then there's something missing in that. So I appreciate that question.
And I would only add to that space as we look at continuing the rollout of our Graduate of Granite. The overarching concept is graduation. We have very specific action steps that address graduation of all students, and those increases and the narrowing of the gaps, as well as literacy and numeracy. You've seen these priorities. And being able to then, for the schools to identify what their specific context is, capturing that in the continual improvement plan, identifying what their data say, and then being able to articulate the action steps for improvement. So it is really at that individual site level to take their context into play around very specific priorities that we all have as a district, and then advancing what it even looks like for resource allocation that are aligned to those priorities, but using that continual improvement plan to facilitate it. But of course, the Graduate of Granite is a strategic plan for the district to channel that direction.
And I might add too, we hold some mid-year reviews, Aaron and I, with each of the Title I principals, and we look really thoughtfully at what do the data say in each of these schools, and are they making a movement toward their goals, and how are they spending their money? It's a really nice link, and really the CIP drives that conversation because they need to look at their data to develop a plan, and then they look at the funding sources to fit with what their goals are as a result of how they see their data.
Adding one element to that too, in the school improvement plan, there's targeted school improvement areas, and these subgroups are oftentimes identified in that plan. And there's specific questions or in our framework of that plan saying, this subgroup's performing poorly, here's your resources, what do you plan to do? So that targeted school improvement piece is another element that ties to the strategic planning.
So I have a question with, you mentioned Title I, and as Dr. Nye said, so each school has this individual plan, and they can see individually what their school is happening in those grades and whatever. So do you go out to those schools that are not Title I? Because we have so many that are so close to, I mean, many of our schools, most of our schools fit in the Title I parameter. They just don't get extra money. So do you go out and help them also to focus in? And I'm sure by their improvement plans and everything, it's all tight. But I wanted them to have as much help also as
Yeah.
they can.
Absolutely.
The Leadership and Improvement Director is their primary support and does have that conversation with the principal at the school. Joan and Aaron supplement that at Title I schools. So not only does a Title I school have their Leadership and Improvement Director working with them on their plan for improvement, Joan and Aaron, as Title I's meant to do, supplement or add to that for Title I schools.
And I'll also add that I have gone out with the other directors to their school sites, and I've met with them with their data and had these same conversations. Yeah.
And I'd only add, so in my site visits with principals, right, 2 times a year, each school with a school leadership and improvement director, that's SLID. Their continual improvement plan that are based on these metrics and is the focus of that conversation, right? Through the spirit of shared accountability, what's occurring in the school, what are the goals, what are the leading indicators suggesting that we're making progress to the goals as aligned to specific action steps, and then very similarly in that site visit as occurs with our Title I principals, making adjustments as is necessary, but recognizing that the principal supervisor or that leadership improvement director that reports to John, they're there with me, and we're having the discussion, and then they can follow up as necessary. As I go to the different schools, they're also able to make sure we identify obstacles to the goals. We look at adjustments to the plans as necessary. And I would just make note for the record that these continual improvement plans, right, for each school are on the school's websites. So if anyone wanted to know what a school is prioritizing, what those metrics are, they could go to the school's website and they could see what that school is working on, which also becomes powerful in terms of community engagement portion for parents and families, but also the community at large generally to see, hey, what helps resources, what are the priorities of any specific school.
I just had one more question. So can you go to the graduation rates? It was a bar graph. This one here. When I look at this graph where, mostly everybody's between 77, not counting our special schools, and, 96%. And then go to the ACT scores, 1. And the ACTs, you see much lower scores. I mean, I'm going to take Granger because it's a standout for this. If I can't remember Granger's, but it was obviously above 77% graduation with 30% of its kids proficient. So this is something I know that we've been trying to tackle for a long time. What are some of the interventions that we have specifically put into this one issue?
So I think you're speaking to the fact that these are measuring two different things, right? So we're looking at ACT measuring proficiencies in math, reading, English, and science. And a graduation rate, which is a much different calculation. And we are looking at helping our students do better with these standards and their proficiency related to standards, but they're really measuring very different things.
I guess what I'm trying to say is that, to me, these two graphs together would indicate that we are graduating students who are not proficient on a high level. Would you disagree with that assessment of that data?
So this is a great question, and
Yeah,
it's similar
it's
to what
really-
we talked about with proficiency-based learning and trying to make sure that our schools' diplomas have a value proposition. So this idea that you're graduating from Granite and receiving a diploma, but your levels of proficiency are at level X as well. And I think that's what you're getting to generally. Joan's responding in that there's some not apples to apples when it comes to ACT and proficiency in Utah Core standards, but generally you're not wrong. That's what we're looking at and trying to reconcile and making sure. And what I would point to is again PBL, this idea of the scoring that we're giving in classes and reporting out to parents is proficiency on standards. It's not all the other things that could be mixed into that. So perhaps not a definitive answer for you, but very much recognizing the value proposition of a Granite diploma and looking at proficiency, whether it's RISE, whether it's Utah Aspire Plus, whether it's ACT, and making sure that students who are graduating have a certain level of proficiency.
May I also, just for clarification on the ACT, ACT is a college entrance exam. And so what ACT does is not so much proficiency, but more of a measure of how well they'll do that first quarter in college. And so if a student reaches the ACT benchmarks, it on their metric would suggest that they would have a 75% chance or better of getting a C in that content area that first semester, excuse me, I said quarter, but that first semester of college. So it really is more about college preparation. That's not to discredit it. We still, per the value proposition, want to see that measure go up, and we'll work on that for our students to be prepared, better prepared perhaps for what lays in store for those that want to pursue college. That's great. So it continues to be a focus. But it all should be recognized that ACT as a metric is less sensitive than the other proficiency measures that we have. Recognizing a 0.1 or 0.2 increase, if you're to go from 18.2 to 8.3 or 18.4, even that 0.1 or 0.2% point increase represents a 12 to 15 standard deviations of improvement statistically, which again isn't that sensitive of a measure. We'll want to improve it, but recognizing the improvement metric on that is slower and at smaller increments.
You'll remember too, in our strategic plan, we have two overarching goals, and one is graduation rate and one is increasing proficiency. So again, recognize the importance of both of those two measures and not just one.
My thoughts as I looked through this were if you do the same thing, you'll get the same results. And this sense that we need to really shake things up. But then I was like, well, what do I think proficiency-based learning was? That's shaking things up in a big way. What about reconfiguration? In many ways, that was targeted at some of these issues as well. And I don't think it's that we aren't doing things. I don't think that's necessarily the issue. But we are not moving the needle in the ways we need to. And I think that we need to say it. Because it's not moving. It's not moving. And I think that I don't want to just keep accepting that my students can only do this well. I don't want to ever get comfortable with that. I don't want to get comfortable with these graphs. And what I want to do is I want to see Granger High. I want to see that where I want to be is 100%. And I don't want to compare my students against how many students in the state are doing well, because I don't care how many students in the state are doing well. I want 100% of my students doing well, right? And I think that sometimes we get not that those comparisons are not helpful. I do think they're helpful. I just don't want us to get comfortable. I want us to be irate every time we see this, and I want us to feel this motivation and passion to get something in the school for that student that is not in this bar graph. Does that make sense? And I don't mean to discredit anything we're doing, because I feel like I'm working hard too. It's not, I don't mean to say someone else isn't working hard, because I think all of us are working hard. The question is there a smarter way to do it? Is there some data out there that are some best practices that we can try? Are we willing to just take risks? And it's hard to take risks when it's kids' lives out there. But I don't know. I just wanted to make sure to express it right here before dinner.
And I appreciate that, but I also wonder if ACT is where we want the target to be. Because from experience, I look at my children and their ACTs weren't up there, and yet they succeeded at college. And so I think, do I want the focus to be on the ACT, or do I want the focus to be well-rounded and a student that if they choose to go to college, yes, they can succeed, and not put pressure on them with the ACT?
Thanks for bringing that up, Connie, because I wasn't meaning that specifically at this, because I think that overall, when we look at the Aspire, and then it was especially frustrating to me when I found that our growth rates were not as high as I would expect them to be. Well, I mean, as far as the state is going, because you can always say, well, yes, but we have a very, a district with very marginalized kids, and there are lots of other reasons why we are lower, and they are legitimate reasons. But growth, we shouldn't have a reason, really,
Education moves slowly, and any improvement, I look at the improvement from years ago when I was on the board to what we are doing now, and I go, hallelujah, because I see where growth will take place. It's just slow. And because every year we have new students, so if in first grade we get and we see improvement when they get to 12th grade, 12, 13 years, what an improvement we've made. And that's where we have to start. These guys that are on there now have had some big bumps in their education. And I think, let's look and see if our first graders are making improvement every year. If, that we can move it all along.
But if you have a third of your kids reading on a level of proficiency in third grade, or I can't remember, I'm making up data here, but you cannot wait. You cannot let it take 20 years. And I mean, I'm thinking back 20 years, or even to when I was a kid. It feels like when I was a kid, it was still the same amount of people who were proficient. We were like a third of our kids proficient even back then. And so I guess I question, we are doing great things, but is it moving the needle? And not only that, but can you compare data from today to data from before?
Can I speak?
Yeah, go ahead, Karen.
Thanks.
I'm gonna close it. I mean, I've decided to stop talking.
Well, we have other board members with questions, and we've got to get to dinner. So I want to celebrate, first of all. I know this, we look at the data. I just want to preface my statements by saying I know teachers are working their hearts out in the classrooms. I know principals do care about this data. And Julie, you stated it. We're saying we applaud everything good that's going on. I do think we are starting out with a new strategic plan. So to address your concerns, I think the strategic plan does have a sense of urgency that we've been lacking. And so I'm hopeful that the strategic plan that we've spent a lot of time on, and as well as coupled with this graduate of Granite, I think, to me, those are the two things needing to come together to see that needle move. Because I don't think any of us up here as board members are comfortable looking at some of this data and saying, well, that's good enough. That's good enough. No, we don't. So on one hand, I want to recognize the efforts that are being made and applaud them. And then sometimes we can be working our hearts out and work harder and harder and harder, but we're not working smarter and smarter and smarter. And I think the smarter piece comes with maybe this more goal-driven strategic plan, the metrics that are in place, looking at the data. I said it earlier. Good data drives good decisions. Where are we putting those resources from the data that we're seeing, which goes along to your sense of the urgency. And so that's where I look and I say, you know what, this board, we are actually taking a little bit more of a stand to see those data points move a little bit because we have backed this strategic plan. We've participated in prepping it, and as well as the graduate of Granite, to be able to see those come together. So that was my comment.
Thanks, Karen. So before I turn it over to Rich, if we have, it sounds like we have maybe some further discussion on this, and we can always look at bringing this back as an item on a study session. So if there's interest in that, if we haven't gotten to everybody's questions, because I know we're kind of on a time crunch here, let's talk about bringing it back further. So with that.
My issue on that would just to be, okay, what next would be the presentation I'd ask for.
Two things. One, really quick for the record, looking at statewide data to move at 1 or 2 points, point 1 or 2 points. It's 3 standard deviations, not 12 to 15. That's statewide data. I just wanted to be clear. Never want to give bad information, especially in the presence of math teachers. Hello, Michelle. Second, if you could recognize we're going to talk about this perhaps another time. Can you go back to the growth bar graph? Really quick, because she's pulling that up. Yep, let's go with one. Yeah, we can use this one. So taking a look at that, one thing that we do celebrate in growth is sometimes you have a child that's in 7th grade that's 3 grade levels behind. Teacher works like crazy. A lot of intervention, a lot of support. That child grows 2 years in 1 year. And that's what's represented here. Now, as far as proficiency goes, is that child proficient? At grade level yet? No, the power of yet, but they grew 2 years in a year's time. And that's worth celebrating. And we have that happening all the time. In fact, this data begins to represent some of that, where you typically think of as a state, as we've looked at statewide norms, and student growth percentile is a normed referenced and not a criterion referenced measure, but it's normed referenced. But still, what 40 generally represents in a student growth percentile is 1 year's worth of academic growth, generally across the board. So anything above the 40th percentile represents more than 1 year's growth, generally, as we look at it as a state and as things have been implemented. So if you take a look there, we might have some students that aren't at proficiency yet, but my goodness, they're making tremendous growth. Now, depending on where the student is, 40th percentile isn't enough. 50th percentile might not be enough. A student may need 3 years of 80th percentile type growth to reach proficiency, but we're looking at that too. At the student level. So just a point of clarification and something to be celebrated and recognizing that proficiency does follow growth and tremendous growth.
And I would imagine that's where also, as we talked about Title I funding and us preferring to put it in the elementary where that growth can be impacted highly. I think that's where we're concerned. We will return to this at some point, but we appreciate you being here and for what you've shared. This has been great information, and I think it gives us a better sense of what we're facing here. So thank you, appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks.
You did great, Rick.
Don't hear you say that. She heard you.
Joan, you're a regular board meeting.
All right, we are going to take a break for dinner, and we will reconvene back here at 7 o'clock.